beautiful day for another big three analysis. Actually, today it's going to be a big five analysis looking at XRP, Solana, Ethereum, Cardano, and Bitcoin as well. But we're actually going to start it off here with the Tether dominance chart. The Tether dominance chart gives me a general bias on the market direction. And I think that this one's a lot more clear than any of the altcoin charts that we're going to be looking at today, or just in general, to be honest with you. And it is this. In the short term, is the Tether dominance chart more likely to come to the downside or move to the upside? It's more likely to come to the downside. The reason why I say that is because we have yet another rejection of that white 200 moving average here on the weekly time frame, and it is, as of right now, definitely a lower high compared to the highs that we saw from September of 2024. And of course, we expect that the Tether dominance chart should, in theory, play opposite of most cryptos, or if not all cryptos, and so this one coming down would be short-term / medium-term good for most cryptos. But here's the thing: well, I do think it comes down more because we do see some we do see momentum oscillators turning down here, and we actually do see some hidden bearish divergence even on the weekly RSI, which I won't bring up here, but feel free to validate that yourself. I do think that the downside is limited. I do not think that this thing is going to trend to new lows compared to what we saw earlier this year or late in 2024. Just these same lows, basically at around 3 3/4%. So that's like, in my opinion, best case scenario. Now I do have a few areas of interest for a downside move here, or I guess I already have it on there. First and most obvious one, and extremely likely to be hit, is 514%. That would be, I suppose, more relevant in the short term, say over the next few weeks. Then you got the 484 region. I do think you will hit that one, and the 4.5% region as well. Any one of these can provide the impetus for a higher low. I'm personally biased towards this one coming down, at least into this pocket right here. But that would be a short-term bullish for many cryptos. And even if the Tether dominance chart, by the way, did come back down all the way to these lows, which is certainly possible, even though I don't think it's going to make new lows, Bitcoin could, in theory, make new all-time highs upon that. Maybe not like significantly new all-time highs, but, could put in a slightly new highs. Let's say maybe around like $120,000. We did see this relationship kind of play out early this year / late last year, where the December lows were right here and the January lows were right here. And of course, Bitcoin from December to January highs moved up, I don't know, like $20,000 or something like this, from 90,000 to like 110,000, something like that. So, it's definitely possible for Bitcoin to make new all-time highs, but I do think that this market really does have a sort of long-term time bomb attached to it, in that if once it starts to get down to these regions here, in my opinion, have to start looking for major macro highs, if not already. And like I said, if things do make new highs, it's unlikely to be anything like significantly higher is what I'm trying to say. Anyways, that just provides the sort of backdrop for how I'm going to be looking at most of the altcoins today, starting off with XRP here. I do want to point out just the price action pivots, just to go over the general range, because I do think that it's quite compelling and it gets things really, really accurately and succinctly. In the 2-day time frame, getting the upside pivot at 2.25, meaning that XRP closing above 2.25, or technically even trading above 2.25, should indicate a nice short-term breakout out of what seems to be an inverted head and shoulders here. Not that I necessarily care that much for that pattern, but it does give a potential target for that, which would be, I'm not doing this exactly perfectly, but something like this, maybe as much as like $2.5, $2.60 or something like that. So that would align with Tether dominance, obviously moving to the downside. But when we go down to the daily, we should also be aware that the daily pivot is essentially the low. So the daily is given a bit of a short-term bullish bias. I mean, obviously this one's been playing out for a while now, but I don't really expect anything below this before a decent bounce to the upside. Now, in the short term, could it retrace a little bit more towards the 200 simple at like 195? Sure, yeah. But again, I'd be looking at that as probably an opportunity before this one does get a nice leg up Again, I'm not calling new highs here or anything like that, but somewhere in this pocket here would feel right. It would feel right. Not that feeling really matters for this, but on top of all of this, I do want to go back to the weekly and just acknowledge that the weekly stochastic momentum oscillator is going to have a chance to cross the upside coming into this week's closure if this thing is above 211, which right now it's actually below. And regardless of whether it crosses up or not, there is a major issue here because the weekly stochastic oscillator has been playing off of this long-term regression governing the lows since October of 2023. So getting the October 2023 lows connected with the February 2024 lows, connected again with the July of 2024 lows. And welcome to our new subscriber. I didn't actually catch your name over there, but hey, feel free to like and subscribe if you want more content like this, or you just want it to come into your inbox, at a more appropriate hour. Anyways, my point is that upon tomorrow's closure for the weekly, I don't really see how this one cannot break. So that does tell me that medium term, when this thing rallies, should be looking for generally, another lower high on a higher term time frame. So like I said, it could easily rally up to like $2.50 even, but that would still be a lower high compared to the most important high here, which is your February highs. Which is relevant for trend. Again, looking at the PA pivots. Oh, and by the way, I've been getting a lot of questions about the PA pivots indicator. We're going to actually be offering it up probably starting tomorrow. Maybe I even do it. Maybe I even offer it up in like a soft launch way today. We'll do the same thing as we have with all of our other indicator packages as well, where you can trial it out for the first 30 days free. But like I said, it's not there just yet. It may be if you check on the Teachable page later today, it might be there, but I expect to announce it at least in a soft way tomorrow, Sunday. Anyways, moving on from there, let's go into Solana. Solana here, not super interesting to me as well, although I do think it does still have short-term upside, as we've been saying for multiple weeks now. I do think that last week's low is a very I don't know about very strong low, but it's a very good low to work off of on a decent rally for the first time realistically since January. So I do think that this one does travel higher, again supported by that Tether dominance very likely coming down in the coming weeks. But when we go here to the daily, I do want to acknowledge that the price action pivot is the Wednesday low. So as long as Solana is above there, I do look at this one as, just likely to carry onwards and upwards with a short-term uptrend. Next area of interest is, of course, going to be around 150 to 155 region. I do think it'll get somewhere around there, probably a bit of a short-term pullback. And then does it trade higher, in the coming month or two? Probably yes. Going over here to the weekly, going back to the daily, just want to acknowledge again that the bullish divergence on the daily RSI is certainly playing out here. Short term still angled towards the upside, again, as long as it remains above this pivot. Anyways, going on to the weekly, also want to acknowledge that this one is bouncing off of the 200 simple for the first time in its lifespan. Don't know how much that matters on this one, but I mean, it did catch the low pretty much to the exact fucking decimal as of right now. So it seems to seems to matter for this one at least. And this is going to be combined with the weekly stochastic oscillator, very likely crossing to the upside if this one can close tomorrow, Sunday, above 105 and 6 cents, which I do think is rather likely. Now, just like XRP, Solana had the same sort of issue with the long-term regression here on the weekly stochastic oscillator. This one had been basing off of this level at around 33 for the past 2.5 years. And obviously once it broke it, that was in late February, price action followed through to the downside. So, I do think that it's going to work its way up here, but again, I do have to be on the defensive for yet another lower high. Again, long-term, this leaves a lot to be desired, even though, again, I really do think that this one is going to trade decently higher from here, to the upside, not to new highs or anything like this, but to the upside, which we'll talk about general targets in a moment. But as long as the monthly stochastic oscillator is positioned to the downside, I look at this as very risky. I look at this as very, very risky, and not to be expecting any sort of sustained rally to the upside, to new all-time highs or anything like this. And realistically, the monthly is kind of shaping up to be similar to Ethereum, where it tests into this multi-year high, doesn't exceed it on a closing basis and then comes back down, into its normality. But more relevant to the short/medium term here, like I said, I do think that this one rallies up a decent amount more. Areas of interest. The first one's going to be actually about 150, let's say. I think it'll almost definitely hit there. Of course, there's going to be pullbacks along the way, but, generally probably going to hit around there in the next week or two. Probably a little bit of a pullback after that. And then if I am looking for extension, I'd be looking somewhere between the 50% and the 618 level. That's actually all the way between 170 to almost 200 or 190, actually. We can all see that the white 200 simple on the daily time frame is coming in around there at 180. So right in between these, that would be a nice area for a potential rejection. With downside implied from there, but yeah, either way that I look at it, this one, I'd be betting on upside here in the short/medium term, meaning that I don't expect this one to go below last week's low before a decent rally to the upside. Anyways, moving on from there, let's get into Cardano. I know a lot of people love this one, which fair enough. The price action pivots indicator here is actually giving us a range right now. It's not declaring a trend either which way. It's giving us a range between the high from last Sunday and the low of Wednesday. Wednesday's low being about 59.5 cents and last Sunday's high being about 67 cents. I would have a slight bullish bias on this one. Again, just considering what Tether dominance is likely to do here. Of course, if I'm wrong on Tether dominance and this one, trades back above 6%, then hey, all of these rallies get canceled. But again, I don't think that that's happening. Although of course I can be massively wrong about that. Anyways, we do see some regular bullish divergence here. It is actually a phantom drive coming off this last low. So I would be treating this low here at 59.5 cents as a very important low, meaning that as long as Cardano is above there, I would be looking for upside, and I'd be expecting it to exceed that Sunday high, essentially confirming a breakout and likely a rally at least somewhere around 69 to 70 cents. That 55 EMA there. Personally, I do think that things will travel a little bit higher than that, but just like XRP, just like Solana, this one's coming off of a major moving average on the weekly. That's a 377 there. I don't think it's breaking down below last week's low without a decent rally first. But again, decent rally is not the same thing as making new yearly highs or anything like that. I don't think that that's happening anytime soon, if maybe at all. I really don't know on this one. But also looking at this one from actually no, I don't have stochastic momentum on here. Let's go look at this from a stochastic momentum perspective and see what the weekly is doing as well. I would expect this one to be supporting a bounce, and it will if it can close above 69 cents. So I do like 69 cents because it's a great number, and also because that number continues to show up on multiple different planes. Now let's assume that it does reclaim that region. What would be the area of interest for that? Well, let's look at some of these fibs here, and again, I do think that it's going to at least get above 69, 70 cents. So that means that I'd be looking somewhere between, the 618 and the 50% level as like the next sort of highly probable area of interest. That's given us between about 77.5 cents all the way up to 85.5 cents. I think it probably, goes towards the deeper end of that one. Again, we're probably talking about like the next month or two of price action, but just like the other ones, this is a hard chart to love here long term. We're going to see monthly stochastic momentum officially cross the downside for the first time since May of last year, before the last major correction, which did drag on how many percent down? 66% down. If this one does close the month out below 98 cents. So while I do think it rallies in the short term, that's kind of a tall order to fill to close back above basically a buck. I think that this thing, again, very, very easily could hit like 75 to 85 cents, but that's still, a decent amount away from $1 or 98 cents for that matter. Anyways, moving on from there, let's get into Ethereum. In fact, I think I just destroyed my Ethereum chart. There we go. Or Ethereum destroyed its own chart, to be honest. Anyways, Ethereum, same thing on the PA pivots, giving us a nice range here using that last Monday's high of 1690 for a pivot, essentially declaring a breakout here with targets probably up towards 19, maybe even 2000, but somewhere around there. Of course, we also do have the range low. That's Wednesday's low. That is 1538. As long as Ethereum's above there, I treat it the same as the other ones. It's more likely to rally here than not. Long term, not a humongous fan of this one, but you are coming off of a very major moving average here, that weekly 377, that blue moving average, which, whenever you get down to like a major moving average like that, you almost always get at least a pity bounce. And this is the first test on it, well, realistically ever. So I'd be expecting, a pretty damn good bounce from this region. We're also going to see, very likely, although it's never a guarantee with Ethereum, but very likely we're going to see weekly stochastic momentum cross the upside for the first time since September or October of last year. Just fucking insane, man. And that will happen on Sunday if this thing closes above 1473. So I would say that's looking pretty good right now, but you never know with Ethereum. Of course, we should also be reminded that the monthly stochastic momentum has been keeping us safe from being bullish on this damn thing, as long as this is crossed the downside, which it has had several chances in the past 6 months to cross the upside, and it fails every fucking time since May of last year. So this one continues down, by the way, as long as it's below almost 3,300. So again, putting things in perspective here, I do think that you get a bounce, probably a big bounce, but it's going to be really hard to flip around, at least in the short term. Anyways, looking at our fibs, I do think that Ethereum could very easily test up somewhere actually above 2,000, maybe closer to like 2,100. I see a lot of things around there. Just this last swing high from March of this year, and then also the 382 level. Of course, if it does go for a deeper rally, I would be looking actually somewhere around or a little bit below the 618 fib at 2,700. Still a far cry away from 3,000 to be fair, but that would also be hitting the daily 200 simple and the 377 there as well. So that'd be a great place if this thing is going to ultimately be extremely bearish, to get a major rejection leading into the next major lower high, with a big drive to the downside, perhaps even making new lows. But, just like all the other ones that we looked at, I really don't think it's going to be taking out last week's low without a really decent bounce first. Again, putting this into perspective, from where it's at right now to even 2,000 or a little bit above 2,000 is nearly a 30% rally. So, I do think that you're going to get something like that in the next coming month or two. But I ain't calling like a macro low here, at least not as it stands. Again, as long as that monthly stochastic oscillator is positioned to the downside, it just has not been a good time to bet on Ethereum, and that has been very, very consistent here. So yeah. Anyways, I think we are at the last one now. We'll just go quickly over Bitcoin, or actually, do we want to go for quantum wave bands? It looks like they took a trade. No, this was not yesterday. For some reason, I thought this was yesterday because it looks new to me. But yeah, it did take a little scalp trade here, opening at 83,350, closing at 84,800. Not bad, especially in this market environment. There just really isn't that much going on. And of course, you can try this out for free for the first 30 days in the same way that you can try out hopefully the PA pivots indicator later today or maybe tomorrow, with the same code trial in all capitals, and you can just see if it's relevant to you or not. But this is the hourly strategy. This is the 30-minute strategy. There's the code. 30-minute strategy has not traded since last Saturday, so this one, it's not like there's just not that much opportunity right now, with price action more or less being sideways as fuck for the last 7 days. But as far as Bitcoin goes, we did see the weekly closure on, I think it was Thursday, because again, Friday was a holiday, that being Easter or Good Friday. And we did see that the weekly, I wouldn't say it closes a rejection of the median, but it certainly closed as a test of the median. And it does offer up a pretty easy way to be looking at this coming into next week. If Bitcoin just, pops back above this past week's high, which is on CME 86,755, it's probably good enough to declare that this one is having a short-term breakout. And, I still think that Bitcoin trades up closer to like, above 90 probably, before it's all said and done. But, if you are going to get another major rejection, I guess somewhere in this pocket here is going to be the area of interest. And if not, then hopefully Bitcoin would make like a slightly new all-time high, somewhere between, I'm going to say like 115 to 130. and then I think things are over, to be honest with you. But it is what it is. It is what it is. Anyways, as far as Bitcoin spot price action on the weekly here, it is more suggestive of a bounce incoming, because it is actually reclaiming some of these major regions, these major ranges. This one's gonna have a chance to close above the 50% of historic returns range low for the first time in a very long time, many weeks. If it can maintain by Sunday's closure above $84,000, 5-day time frame, which is also closing at the same time, showing the median at 86,700. So if we can start to see reclaims of that region, then I probably would be looking for a move, into the 90s, mid to low 90s, most likely. Potential for more, as always, but yeah, that would be a pretty decent move nonetheless. Anyways, I think that is going to do it for me. Or actually, sorry, and then also to the downside, just as like areas of interest to the downside, if it does get there, I guess somewhere down around the bottom of the 38.2 level. I suspect that that's going to move up coming into next week's open, but that would be somewhere around like 79 to 80,000 bucks. So if it does play out a retracement, if it does fail that price action pivot to the downside, it's probably where I'm looking. In fact, I'm curious, where is the price action pivot for Bitcoin on CME here? Let's see what the daily says. Daily is showing bearish pivot at 89. And do we have a bullish pivot? No, well, obviously not. Bullish pivot is as long as this thing's above, what was it, Wednesday's low. Yeah, so Wednesday's low seems pretty important for pretty much most things on lower term time frames. As long as it's above Wednesday's low, I'd be looking for just general upside. But keeping in mind that, the greater scheme of things in the background. Anyways, this video is way too fucking long. I just looked at the number over here. We're over 20 minutes. I apologize about that. We're actually live simultaneously on Twitter, just shooting the shit, having a little bit of a chill, relaxed hangout right now. But I'll be signing off on that note. As always, I want to wish everyone the best. Take care, much love, and see you hopefully tomorrow.